Have you ever noticed that the Omnitrix doesn't just look like Ben, but kinda is Ben? Not literally, of course, but in terms of what each version says about him as a person and as a hero at that point in his life. Because every Omnitrix reflects something different. Sometimes it reflects Ben's personality, sometimes his flaws, sometimes the stakes he faces, and sometimes the watch itself is shaped by the hero he is, or the kind of hero he becomes. So here's what every Omnitrix tells you about its user. And if you think I'm completely LARPing right now, watch the whole video first and then let me know your thoughts down below. Now, this obviously isn't a canon reasoning or anything. These are just connections and parallels that I've drawn from each iteration.
A person who thinks all the time has nothing to think about except thoughts.
Starting off with the prototype Omnitrix, first introduced in And Then There Were 10, this is the original Omnitrix that Ben finds during his first day of summer vacation. Visually, the watch already reflects 10-year-old Ben perfectly. It's bulky, oversized, black, gray, green, and white, matching his outfit and overall aesthetic. It genuinely looks like a device a kid would wear, but where it really reflects Ben is in how it functions. The prototype Omnitrix is unfinished. It has flaws, bugs, and constant issues. And honestly, so does Ben. At this stage, Ben is a good kid at heart with genuine heroic instincts, but he's inconsistent. Sometimes he's selfless, other times he's reckless, immature, or abusing the Omnitrix for dumb reasons.
And totally abused my powers.
Like using Ghost Freak to sneak past a security guard to play the unreleased Sumo Slammers game, or breaking into a warehouse with Kevin and then using the Omnitrix to escape the consequences afterwards. The watch constantly malfunctioning mirrors that inconsistency. Sometimes it gives him the wrong alien. Sometimes it just doesn't work properly. But despite all of that, it still gets the job done. Just like Ben. And even the mistransformations reveal something important about him, because when Ben gets the wrong alien, it forces him to adapt. It brings out his creativity and problem-solving skills in situations that don't go his way. Now, the prototype also has somewhat of a fail-safe to protect its user if things go wrong. And I don't think the fail-safe directly reflects Ben's personality, but I do think it has shaped his attitude and decision-making sometimes, even if he doesn't know about it. He jokes through danger, throws himself into insane situations, and rarely thinks about some of the consequences of what he's doing. Partly because he's 10, but also because he has Gwen and Grandpa Max there to support him. At the end of the day, things usually work out. I mean, because he's the main character and has plot armor. But the Omnitrix itself was also built for something greater than combat.
I didn't create a weapon. All of you did. I created the ultimate device for understanding all the beings of the universe.
And just like the watch itself, Ben still has far more potential than what we currently see, and a purpose greater than fighting, which brings us far into the future to Ben 10,000. First appearing in Ben 10,000, this version of the Omnitrix is essentially an evolved version of the prototype. It still resembles the original design, but now it's grown over Ben's forearm and hand, becoming more like a gauntlet. The design literally reflects Ben's growth. He's older, bigger, more experienced, and the Omnitrix grew with him. This version also has master control, signifying Ben 10,000's complete mastery over the device. He's not figuring it out anymore. He already has. And if you go with the original pop-up trivia and Thomas Perkins' explanation that this is still the prototype Omnitrix evolved over time, it actually implies something kind of sad about Ben, because it means he never truly took it off. Alien Force reveals that Prime Ben eventually removed the Omnitrix to try and live a normal life again. But this Ben seemingly never did. The prototype becoming permanently fused for the rest of his life reflects how consumed he became by being a hero, possibly from all the highs, and how he didn't go through the trauma of losing feedback early on in his preteens. He never stopped. Which brings us to 15-year-old Ben Tennyson and the recalibrated Omnitrix. After recalibrating itself in Ben 10 Returns, the Omnitrix becomes sleeker, slimmer, and far more refined. The black, green, and silver color scheme also matches Ben's new outfit in more mature aesthetic. But the biggest reflection is in how well the Omnitrix functions. For most of Alien Force, the recalibrated Omnitrix works almost flawlessly compared to the original. Arguably represents Ben at his most refined and consistent as a hero. He's more serious, disciplined, and mature. Unlike OS Ben, this version rarely wavers when it comes to doing the right thing. The recalibration itself almost feels symbolic. The watch rebuilt itself to match the person Ben had become. Now yes, the Omnitrix still has occasional issues, like Ben retaining injuries after transformations, like the time he injured his knee after Humungosaur fell from the hybrid ship. But unlike the prototype, these aren't constant problems like mistransformations anymore. This Ben has largely grown into the role, and the Omnitrix has matched it until they didn't. Because Alien Force Season 3 happens, and suddenly both Ben and the Omnitrix start becoming inconsistent again. After defeating the hybrid, Ben develops a huge ego. He becomes more cocky, more laid back, and honestly more unserious at times. Not that he wasn't at all, but more so with the fights he faces every episode and the interactions. You could argue that his character regressed. And fittingly, this is also when the Omnitrix starts getting tampered with. Ben and Kevin literally decide to hack Galvan technology to unlock Master Control before fighting Vilgax in Vengeance of Vilgax, because Ben believes he needs every advantage possible to defeat him, even after his countless wins. I understand that this Vilgax has gotten stronger and gained the powers of 10 champions, but Ben also has more control over the Omnitrix than when he was 10. He's got quick change, no mandatory timeouts, his prior experience, etc., which perfectly exposes Ben's mindset at this point. Ben genuinely believes he needs the extra power to stop Vilgax, especially after defeating the hybrid and their invasion. And his ego also convinces him that he understands the Omnitrix better than he actually does. Instead of listening to Azimuth and trusting his current capabilities, Ben takes the shortcut to immediate power. It's also the reason why he lost his chromostone, due to the mistransformation returning again. And even outside the story, this change wasn't liked. Cartoon Network wanted Ben to feel more like his original 10-year-old self again, because they thought audiences weren't connecting as much with the more mature 15-year-old Ben. So both in-universe and out-of-universe, Ben was slowly shifting away from the more serious and disciplined version of himself that Alien Force originally established. And the Omnitrix soon reflected that change. Now, before we move on to the Ultimatrix, we need to talk about Albedo's Omnitrix. Introduced in Good Copy, Bad Copy, Albedo creates an inferior duplicate of the Omnitrix because he believes somebody like Ben isn't worthy of wielding a device like the Omnitrix in the first place. To Albedo, the Omnitrix should belong to somebody intellectually superior like himself, not a reckless human being. And honestly, this is one of the clearest reflections in the entire franchise. Albedo sees Ben as unworthy, but ironically, he's the one incapable of being worthy himself. He's arrogant, bitter, and self-centered. And the fact that Albedo can only create an inferior copy of the Omnitrix says a lot about him. Thematically, that inferiority reflects Albedo himself. He has intelligence and the power, but completely lacks the skills and knowledge to create a proper Omnitrix, as well as the qualities that actually make Ben worthy of wielding the Omnitrix in the first place. Which eventually leads us to the Ultimatrix. First introduced in the final battle, the Ultimatrix is Azimuth's unfinished prototype Omnitrix with Albedo's modification that Ben later takes for himself. Visually, it resembles the recalibrated Omnitrix, but with a much heavier, gauntlet-like design. And that design matters. The Ultimatrix doesn't feel like a watch anymore. It feels like armor and a weapon. It reflects the fact that Ben is now dealing with far more dangerous threats than ever before, like Agrigor, Ultimate Kevin, Dagon, and Ultimate Vilgax. So he needs a greater power to defeat those threats, which is the addition of the evolutionary function. The evolutionary function forces alien DNA to survive through a worst-case scenario simulation over millions of years. And honestly, one of the best parallels in the entire series is this. The Watch having the ability to evolve aliens reflects how Ben himself was forced to evolve and mature. Throughout Ultimate Alien, Ben is constantly outmatched. He has to grow, adapt, and believes that sometimes he needs to go through the extreme route to solve his problems, or lose, even if it means killing his best friend. And unlike the original Omnitrix, the Ultimatrix doesn't have a failsafe, which is huge because now death is genuinely on the table. The stakes are no longer softened by the safety net that protected OS Ben. And you can see how much more serious Ben becomes because of it, especially during arcs like Ultimate Kevin and when Charmcaster killed the trio. However, there were some cases where Ben did survive even after having thought he was dead, like when Eon de-aged Ben's aliens, or when Ben survived against being crushed by the rubble by Agrigor. But Ultimate Kevin did kill all the Echo, and it sounded like Ben knew he wouldn't survive unless he kept a spare in the trunk. So it's hard to say if the Ultimatrix doesn't have a failsafe, or if it does, but is weak against magic, just like all the other Omnitrixes. But fittingly, the Ultimatrix itself is unstable. It glitches, mistransforms, and even creates sentient ultimate forms. Because unlike the recalibrated Omnitrix, this isn't as refined and bug-free as its prior counterparts. It's a weapon, exactly what Albedo intended it to be, and despite all its problems, Ben still manages to make it work. Just like before, the issue forced him to adapt through experience, creativity, and sacrifice. But did you know there's actually a version of the Ultimatrix without mistransformations? Introducing Ultimate Ben 10,000 and his Omnitrix. Introduced in Ben 10,000 Returns, his version visually resembles the recalibrated Omnitrix, but possesses the evolutionary function. And unlike Prime Ben during Ultimate Alien, this Ben seemingly has full control over it. No mistransformations, no instability, probably a working failsafe too without glitches. But what's ironic is that this version of Ben rarely visually and physically transforms at all. Instead, he mostly stays human while only gaining the powers of his aliens, which is the complete opposite of the original Ben 10,000, who became so obsessed with being a hero that he practically stopped being human altogether. Ultimate Ben 10,000 reflects a future where Ben became more laid back, but still serious at times, like his ultimate alien self, even as an adult. But let's return to Ben Prime, because the Ultimatrix doesn't last long. Azimuth recalls it and eventually destroys it, and instead gives Ben the completed Omnitrix. First introduced in The Ultimate Enemy, Part 2, the completed Omnitrix resembles a cleaner and more refined version of the original, recalibrated prototype, visually matching Omniverse Ben's outfit. But this Omnitrix exposes more of Ben's flaws than his wisdom, because by this point, Ben has proven himself worthy of the official Omnitrix. But because of the tone of the series, Ben has a more playful, lighter, and comedic nature than his prior counterpart. And because of that, the completed Omnitrix still has its issues, mostly due to user error, and it reveals something about Ben. Because Omniverse Ben isn't perfect, he's experienced, confident, and capable, but he's still human who's capable of making mistakes. His mistransformations now feel less like flaws in the Omnitrix and more like flaws in Ben himself. Half the time he's slamming the dial without even looking. Even Azimuth calls him out for how bad he is at using it sometimes. But unlike OS Ben, Omniverse Ben eventually accepts the lack of control with the alien he gets and makes it work.
It always seems to give me the right alien, even when I want something else. I guess I should stop fighting it. It seems to know me better than me.
That's growth. He trusts the Omnitrix, and honestly, the Omnitrix kind of trusts him back. Sometimes the wrong alien genuinely leads to a better outcome. The Watch knows Ben can adapt, but sometimes it gives him complete bull. And because the failsafe has returned, Ben himself seems to be more laid back and chill than he was in Ultimate Alien. Not reckless, just comfortable with the risk to himself.
Your recklessness never ceases to amaze.
Not reckless.
Because no matter how relaxed or unserious Ben can appear sometimes, he still takes his work seriously. Episodes like Frogs of War show clearly that Ben is fully willing to fight even when the odds are stacked against him. But when innocent people are at huge risk, he'll still make the difficult but correct decisions. The completed Omnitrix simply reflects a Ben who has gotten used to the consequences of being a full-time hero. Even after recreating the universe, this guy immediately goes for smoothies. Maybe it's a coping mechanism. Maybe Ben is just insane. Or probably both.
Both.
But years later, Ben eventually develops an entirely new Omnitrix, the Biomnitrix. First introduced in Ben Again, the Biomnitrix is a dual Omnitrix system that allows Ben 10,000 to fuse alien DNA together. And honestly, this might be the most personal Omnitrix Ben ever uses. Because unlike most of the previous watches, this one was built by Ben himself, using his smartest aliens. And according to Derek J. Wyatt, the Biomnitrix represents the idea that Ben 10,000 finally learned to lighten up again, which is a direct contrast to the original Ben 10,000. That version of Ben became consumed by hero work, but this Ben learned to lighten up. Even Azimuth is relieved that Ben is enjoying himself again. However, that's assuming that they're the same Ben. Personally, I think they're different. I think this Ben 10,000 was inspired by Skurd, and my personal headcanon is that Ben was also inspired by alien hybrids in the galaxy, kind of like the plumber's helpers and the hybrids. So to stay true to the Omnitrix's purpose of understanding all the different beings in the universe, he created the Biomnitrix. The dual gauntlet design of the Biomnitrix can be seen as a reflection of Ben's life. He's no longer just a hero, he's also a father. The Biomnitrix, being designed as two separate gauntlets, reflects the fact that Ben himself now balances two responsibilities. And the fusion mechanic itself reflects Ben's creativity. He's not just choosing one solution anymore. He's combining them, experimenting, and creating entirely new ones. And if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to subscribe because at this point, we're close to me analyzing every Omnitrix in the Omniverse. And before we continue, if you want to purchase the Dynamite Ben 10 comics or any Ben 10 related merch, please use the links in the description down below. It helps out the channel a ton. Let's continue. Now, I did say nearly every Omnitrix, so let's rapid fire the rest. The Nematrix is designed to turn their user into predators and can only be safely used by non-sapient beings, perfectly reflecting the savage and somewhat unintelligent creatures it transforms the user into. The Hero Watch reflects Ben 23's fame and wealth through its blue, black, and gold color scheme. It's also modeled after the prototype, reflecting the current stage of Ben 23 as a coming-of-age hero. The Argitrix reflects Argit's selfish and greedy nature through its orange, but mainly its gold color scheme. The Negative Trix reflects Negative Ben's darker and emo personality through its darker design. Bad Ben's Omnitrix is almost identical to Prime Ben's, except that it uses a darker shade, reflecting how he's essentially an evil and more twisted version of Prime Ben himself. The Gwenaverse Omnitrix keeps the prototype design, but changes the color scheme to match Gwen's palette. It being the prototype reflects the current stage of Gwen as a coming-of-age hero. Mad Ben's Power Watch reflects his Mad Max-inspired aesthetic through its orange color scheme and aggressive spike design. The Zombie Trix reflects Benzaro's undead nature through its simplified and zombified appearance, along with its purple color scheme. The Reboot Omnitrix constantly evolves and gains new gimmicks throughout the series, reflecting how experimental and constantly changing the reboot itself was in terms of its story, as well as reflecting Ben's growth and increase in power as a hero. And finally, the Dynamite Omnitrix reflects the darker, sci-fi, and more mature tone of Dynamite Ben's universe through its exposed circuitry and symbiote-like design. Once you start looking at the Omnitrix through this lens, it becomes really hard not to notice these connections. Every version of the watch reveals something different about Ben. The prototype Omnitrix reflected a kid learning what it is to be a hero. The recalibrated Omnitrix reflected a refined and a more disciplined hero. The Ultimatrix reflected a hero forced to evolve under pressure, and the completed Omnitrix reflected a fully fledged hero who became the hero he was always supposed to be. The Omnitrix evolved because Ben evolved, and sometimes the flaws in the Omnitrix expose the flaws in Ben himself. But what do you think? Do you think these connections were intentional, or am I genuinely overthinking a watch made for alien transformations? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching.